Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today's going to be a little video about one more reading challenge that I forgot about, or reading goal for the year, I guess. So there is a Goodreads group called Middle East and North African Lit, I think, and every year they have a couple of different challenges, and I'm doing one of them this year, which is to read 12 different books from 12 different regions. But I'm sort of modifying this a bit, I guess, to fit with my just read more stuff off my bookshelf, for goodness sake, because my apartment is overcrowded sort of challenge. So basically there's Palestine, Middle East and North Africa history, empowering women, Iraq, Sham, which is Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, the Arabian Peninsula, the Maghreb, which is Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, and Mauritania, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Sudan or Horn of Africa, and Central Asia or Afghanistan or Pakistan. So I'll start with 3 of the books that I've already read, because then I can put them away and don't have to keep them on my pile for the end of the month, which is lovely. So one of them is, where did it go here? So basically I've got more than one book for some prompts and then no book for other prompts, because I have read a lot of Egyptian authors. I've read a couple of Turkish authors. I haven't read a lot of Iraqi authors. So if I find some more, I might read one this year, but I don't have any on my shelf at the moment. And I have read Iraqi authors before, so it's not a priority for this year anyway, maybe next year. But one of the books from the Arabian Peninsula is Manal Al-Sharif's Daring to Drive, which is a fantastic book. She's been compared to Rosa Parks, not exactly incorrectly, I think, except in terms of bigotry. It was gender that prevented her from being able to drive in Saudi Arabia. And so she actually, this is a really interesting story to me, because she started out as a young woman. She was quite extremist in her religious views, and I think she's still Muslim, but she's not so fundamentalist anymore. She's worked in several countries around the world now, and met a lot of different people, and just, you know, when that happens, or at least when that happened to me, I didn't go to other countries, but I read books and just met other people outside my community. And it sort of expands your mind and your idea of who exists in the world, who has the right to exist in the world, and just different ways of living in the world, which you realize aren't as inherently terrifying as you'd maybe been taught. So that was interesting, in that her views eventually changed. She worked for Aramco, which is the American Arabian oil company, as a computer engineer, excuse me, in computer security, which was very cool. She was the only woman in her department the whole time she was there. And she did actually, when she started to drive, she went to jail for driving. And then she got out and eventually had to leave the country, but she's won some awards since then. And yeah, so it's I don't know if I'm explaining it all very well or not, but it's a really interesting book. And the subtitle, I think, A Saudi Woman's Awakening, is quite interesting, because it shows that what she came to believe, she didn't always believe, and it sort of shows you how she came to believe, or how her beliefs came to change, which I always think is quite interesting. Another book I read that's sort of MENA adjacent is The Beekeeper of Aleppo. Christy Lefteri, I think, was born in the UK, but her parents are from Cyprus, which is very near Lebanon. And it's a beautiful, sweet story. If you've read Khalid Hosseini or Nadia Hashimi, she reminds me a bit of them, except this one is set in Syria, Greece, and the UK. And it's a couple who have to leave Syria because of the war, and their travels to the UK. But they're so sweet, these two people. And the relationship is adorable, and that despite the horrifying things that they've seen and experienced. And so it's a really good book. I mean, and it's not, like, I've read some stories of refugees that sound very, this is the moral of the story, and you will come to sympathize with these people, which is a sentiment I don't dislike, but I think getting that across is much more effective when it's not a moralizing story like that. And it's just a story about two perfectly ordinary people who anybody I think can recognize as perfectly ordinary people who ended up in horrifying situations just through chance, I guess. And yeah, so that was quite a lovely book. I enjoyed that one. The third book I've read is, so in my Read Around the World challenge, I realized I'd never read a book from Yemen. So one of the books, where is it here? It is Prison Time in Sana'a by Abdulkader Al-Guneid. Abdulkader Al-Guneid. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But I read this really quickly. He lives in Canada now, in Calgary actually, apparently. I mean, by the end of this book anyway. It's been several years since then, so who knows. And he was a doctor in Taiz in Yemen, and then there was well, I won't try to explain the political scenario because it's beyond my comprehension. He does try to explain it a bit in the back. Some of that went over my head. It's just a little section at the back which you can skip or not as you like. But the most interesting part was his time in the prison with all different sorts of people. So he was arrested because of what he'd posted on Twitter. And he was arrested by the Houthis because he didn't much agree with anything they were doing, and the sort of violent strategy they were taking. And apparently, at least some of them are, I think it was them, who are descended from the Prophet Muhammad, and so they felt like they have sort of a divine right to rule. And everybody else is therefore inferior and subservient, so violence then ensues, as will happen when you have that attitude. But it was an interesting book because within the prison he met so many different people. Like, he'd met members of Al-Qaeda, he met members of Salah, the deposed president's sort of army supporters. I don't really know what you call them, militia maybe, and just all sorts of random other people who weren't necessarily associated with any one group or another. Some of them had actually done illegal things. Some of them were just political opponents of the Houthis and therefore were in prison. And it was really interesting. He didn't, the people he seemed to like the least were the Al-Qaeda members, which is not really surprising because he's not in favor of violence, and they're very much in favor of violence. But even some of the other political prisoners, I guess you could say, it was so interesting getting to actually hear their views, because, you know, you hear about people in the news, you don't really know what they think. You hear what a reporter or a politician says they think, but you don't hear from the ordinary people who are part of that group, usually. And so it was really interesting. It was like a little, like, not a time capsule, but like a moment in time capsule of these men. It was all men in this prison that he was in. And yeah, it was really fascinating, and it was really quick to read. It didn't take me very long, and I'm glad I did. I think I came to understand more about the political situation in Yemen from reading those stories than from reading the little political sort of summary in the back. Okay, so those are the books I've read so far this month. Excuse me. Some of the other books that I'm going to read are Mornings in Jenin. I don't know how to pronounce all of these words. By Susan Abulhawa, and she's Palestinian. And this has been on my bookshelf for several years, so I figured I should probably read it. I think, though, my library has it as an audiobook, so I may wait until I get that. And then, and this may not be the order I read them in, this is just the order they are on the list. The history book that I want to read is A History of Saudi Arabia by Madawi Al-Rashid, which is this one. And I've never read a history of the Middle East before by a person from the Middle East, specifically by a person from the area that he's writing about, or she. Actually, I don't think I've read a history of the Middle East by a woman. That's unfortunate. I should look for one. Anyway, he actually is Saudi. And so I thought that would be an interesting perspective. Empowering Women. There's this new book that's just come out a few months ago called Women, Life, Freedom, Voices and Art from the Women's Protests in Iran. It's an edited collection of, well, I'll show you, art, stories, essays. I think there's a little bit of poetry in here. Queering of a Revolution. That's cool. There's just a huge variety of voices in this book, which seemed pretty interesting to me. So this is the table of contents. There are 31 different sections. Yeah, and they're just all little snippets of different people's perspectives about the protests. So that's pretty cool. Iraq, I don't have one for. Al-Sham. This book has been on my shelf for, I've forgotten how long now, that long. Gate of the Sun by Elias Khoury. I'm not good at the KH sound. He's a Lebanese author who I've heard of. I think he's quite well known. Okay, so there's the back, but I don't really know much about this book, except that I've heard of this author before, so. Next, okay, Arabian Peninsula. The other two books I want to read, and I don't have this one. This is The Girl Who Fell to Earth by Sophia Al-Mariya. She's a Qatari author, and I've never read a book by anybody from Qatar. So I think that's available as an audiobook as well, so that's on my list. And then this one I don't have either, but I might order it, even though I'm trying to read the books on my shelf, because I've never read an author from Bahrain either. And this is Yummah by Sarah A. Al-Safal. And when possible, I try to read women from the Middle East, not because I'm not interested in men's voices, and I do read books by men from the Middle East because they're, frankly, easier to find. But maybe because they're easier to find, I try and go out of my way to look for books by women as well. Then in the Iran category, there is Jewels of Allah, The Untold Story of Women in Iran by Nina Ansari. And I don't really know much about this book, but I got it during the protests last year and haven't gotten to reading it yet. I follow her on Instagram, and I followed her for years and years, and I love her. She's just such an interesting person to listen to, I guess. And so this is her take on the situation of women in Iran, and I'm very interested in that. Next up is a book that I meant to read a long time ago. So next is Sudan or the Horn of Africa, and I've read books from Sudan, Somalia, and I think Eritrea, but I'll have to double check that. And this is a book I tried to read a couple years ago from Djibouti, but it was too hard for me. So it's Les Enfants de Khat. I think that's that K sound in the back of your throat again. Or Khat, one or the other. Anyway, by Muna Hudan Ahmed. And this is the only book that I've been able to get in Canada in either English or French by a Djibouti woman. So I got this one because that was that. Khat is a leaf, like a plant, but it's got, I don't know, maybe the closest comparison is marijuana. You chew it and it makes you slightly euphoric, I think, something like that, slightly relaxed, and so I don't know that it's as strong as some of the other drugs out there, but it does have a narcotic component. And I think the critique of this book is that so many people in her country are addicted to this plant that it makes them a bit, I don't know, unwilling to do anything they don't have to like advance their society or something like that. So that's my understanding anyway of that book. Okay, and then the last category has several books in it. So it's Central Asia, which is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, or Uzbekistan, or Afghanistan or Pakistan, which are sort of like split the difference between Central and South Asia, and are sometimes lumped into the Middle East. So that's why that situation. So one of the books I want to read is, and I've had this on my shelf probably since the Americans invaded Afghanistan, or close to. It's Malala Joya's book, A Woman Among Warlords. It may be from slightly after Constitutional Assembly in Kabul in 2003. Okay. So she's, when was it written actually? Then I'll know how long I've had it. 2009. So I've had it since 2009. And for some reason that I couldn't tell you, just haven't gotten to it yet because there are too many books and not enough time. So that's an Afghan author that I want to read. I have read authors from Afghanistan and Pakistan before, but in the Pakistan department is Malala Yousafzai's book, Moi Malala, and I'm reading the French version. And I'm partway through. I've got the audiobook, so I'm trying to listen and read at the same time, and then sometimes I just listen, and sometimes when I just listen, though, it's too hard for me, so then I read this with it because that's easier for me. So that's that. And then, oh, these were, oops. Okay, I'll get back to those too. I forgot a couple. Typical. Okay, and then I've got The Silent Step by Muhammad Shayakhmetov, and he is from, which country is he from? Kazakhstan. So I've never read a book by an author from Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan out of all of these countries. I've read books from all the rest of them. Central Asian books are really hard to find in English in Canada. Afghan books and Pakistani books are a little bit easier. But Kazakh books, this is the only one I've gotten. So, I can't quite tell from reading it. It's a memoir, but it kind of sounds sort of like a history, so I'm not entirely sure what to expect. But I've read one of Simon Sebag Montefiore's books before and really liked it, so, and he blurbed to this one, so I'm hoping it's good. Another book that I might order, well, two other books, are Gulsafat Shahidi's The City Where Dreams Come True, and I think she must be Tajiki. No. Is she Tajiki? I can't remember. Either Tajiki or Uzbek. Now I'm forgetting which. No, I think I've read a book by an Uzbek author before, because I forgot to write down where Shahidi was from. Anyway, and then Welspar, The Age of AP, and this person is from Turkmenistan. So those are two books that might round out my read around the world for Central Asia, but I haven't gotten them yet, so we will see if I get to those. The other ones, the ones that I have at the moment, as I'm breaking my puzzle here, I only have so much surface space in my apartment, so that's what we're working with. But the ones that I have are a priority for the time being. And the two that I forgot are, I skipped over the Maghreb for some reason. And so I've read books from Morocco and Mauritania. I haven't read books from Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya, which surprised me. I thought I'd read an author from Algeria, but apparently not. So I have Yasmina Khadra's The Swallows of Kabul. It's set in Afghanistan, but it's by an Algerian man, even though it's a woman's name. He was an army officer, I think, hence the pseudonym. And then Hisham Matar's The Return, which is about a Libyan It's a memoir, I think. His dad was in jail or something. Yeah, in one of Gaddafi's prisons. Which sounds highly unpleasant. So that's Libya. And then Gisele Halimi, Une farouche liberté, A Fierce Liberty. She's a Tunisian feminist writer. So I may order that book as well. We will see how the rest of my French books go, because I'm a much slower reader in French than I am in English. And so it takes me a while. And if I get too many, then I get overwhelmed and stressed. So I'll finish the couple that I've got here, and then we'll see about this one. And so that is my MENA challenge for the year, which sort of overlaps with my Read My Bookshelf, for goodness sake, and my Read Around the World challenge. Yeah, that's that for this video. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.